We're about 100 days out from the U.S. Supreme Court Dobbs decision, which reversed Roe v. Wade and pushed the abortion question back to the level of state government. In these 3 months, the pro-choice left has become unhinged in their attempts to dehumanize unborn babies and come up with new arguments to keep abortion legal. What does the Bible have to tell us about some of these new arguments? A few weeks ago, a Democratic gubernatorial candidate in the state of Georgia by the name of Stacey Abrams said this about the abortion question. She said, "There's no such thing as a heartbeat at 6 weeks. It is a manufactured sound designed to convince people that men have the right to take control of a woman's body." Now, isn't that interesting? In order to dehumanize unborn children, to sort of reverse the science that is now in place and take us back to this idea that it is a morally neutral clump of cells, she now has to argue that the results of the sonogram right there in front of your eyes are not really what you've been told it is. It's just a manufactured sound being produced by those who have a political agenda that is not in your favor. The left has rushed to her defense, with one writer even saying embryos at this stage might show, quote, cardiac activity, but not a heartbeat. You see what we're doing here? We do what we always do when we can't win the debate. We change the meaning of words. This thing, this something that's in a woman's body now has cardiac activity, but that's not a heartbeat. Well, what actually is cardiac activity? Planned Parenthood, until just the last few days, previously stated on their website that a heartbeat begins in an embryo between 5 and 6 weeks. But now they've altered their language to say that ultrasounds sound like a heartbeat, but it's not a fully formed heart. Well, here's the thing. The left is losing the cover of science. The science that they used to quote so much. In fact, we've been told over the last 2 years as we've survived this whole pandemic, the mantra was follow the science, follow the science. Except we're told now, don't follow the science when it comes to childbirth, because abortionists can no longer live with the evidence that science produces. Their new arguments include this one: forced motherhood is female enslavement. That's one of the mottos that I've heard recently. Abortion on demand and without apology, another motto that they've heard. It's interesting that what used to be, liberals used to say with a very pious look, how they wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. They have now moved to a position that they want abortion anytime, for any reason, anywhere. They've traded the humanity of biological life for some sort of unspecified notion of personhood that doesn't start until sometime after you leave the birth canal. There's a nurse on the East Coast who's just been indicted for killing, in effect executing, a number of newborn babies in her hospital. Will the left be willing to stand up and say that there's nothing wrong with that? What is the difference between a newborn baby just on the outside of the birth canal and one fully formed at 9 months, just a few inches up the birth canal, not having yet arrived? The baby has no more ability to sustain itself, no more ability to be conscious and aware of, in a cognitive way, of its surroundings. This is a dangerous slope, this argument that the abortionists are beginning to hold now. Technology reveals that there is undeniable life in the womb. And so without the cover of scientific darkness, their arguments are becoming increasingly barbaric, nonsensical, and frankly, easy to debunk. This idea of forced motherhood, let's talk about that. This is a rhetorical desperation. Forced motherhood. Statistics tell us, an organization called American Adoptions tells us that there are 2 million families waiting for a child that they can adopt. That works out to 36 families per available child in this country. We've been told by the left for years a straw man argument that says all of these babies that are being aborted, if they were born, they would be unwanted and they would languish at state expense for years in foster care. That argument just doesn't fly any longer. We've been told that women don't have any other choice than abortion. There are now in almost every state what we call safe haven laws, which allow a woman to surrender a newborn safely with no questions asked, without even any personal information being given. Now, there's nothing easy about adoption. Adoption often causes sacrifice on everyone involved, including the trauma of the mother and sometimes years later for the child. And yet, it's an option that progressives refuse to even entertain. In a twisted new development, they've begun to denigrate adoption by criticizing white parents for adopting children of a different race. I find it fascinating that the political movement that is supposed to give advantages to people of color now say that an African American baby is better off dead than being raised by a set of white parents. At some point, they've also begun to weaponize a woman's health. Abortion has to be legal because we want to protect the health of the mother. Do you realize that out of the hundreds of thousands of abortions that are performed annually in this country, there is less than 1% that even begins to approach a situation where the mother's life is in danger? And now with the advances that we have in neonatal intensive care procedures, children are being delivered early when there's a threat to a mother's life. Children as early as 21 weeks gestation, weighing less than a pound, have survived birth and are given life. We're told that unexpected pregnancies can eliminate career possibilities for women. The options, they're told, is either abortion or poverty, abortion or no college degree, abortion or no advancement in life. It's interesting because what they've done is they've taken the whole idea of liberated feminism and they've made women victims who can't control their own decisions or their own life choices, and they are lost in the ability to ever make anything of themselves. That doesn't sound like liberated feminism to me. The latest argument is you can't be forced to sacrifice your body to save the life of somebody else, no matter how noble that might be, even if that person will die. A philosopher by the name of Judith Jarvis Thomson presented this argument for the first time in 1971, before Roe versus Wade was actually put into law. It's the most famous version of this argument that sort of resurrected itself in recent days. This is the scenario. She said, imagine if a woman woke up in bed, intravenously hooked up to a famous violinist. Thomson wrote in her controversial essay, A Defense of Abortion, that the musician in this scenario suffered from a rare medical ailment and only this woman's circulatory system could keep him alive. His survival requires her to sacrifice her bodily autonomy. Does she have to do this? In fact, is she a murderer if she does not? Now that argument has been renewed in recent days But here's the problem. It's an apples to oranges argument. First of all, the choice to conceive, even if conception is by accident, is fundamentally different than waking up to find out that without a choice, you've been hooked up to provide life support for a total stranger. This stranger in her story, you have no moral obligation or family connection to. That is a fundamentally different scenario than the biological connection with powerful impact that exists, whether we admit it or not, that exists between a mother and a child that she carries in her womb. It's interesting, the left has become so serious about promoting abortion that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has recently taken millions of dollars from California taxpayers to purchase billboards in red states across America, including Oklahoma and Texas and others, promoting California as an abortion destination. Well, that's bad enough for him to cross state lines and put his California values on billboards in red states. But here's what really bothers me. On those billboards, he quotes a Bible verse. He quotes this verse from Mark chapter 12. It's verse 31. The verse says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now, what's fascinating here is there is an almost incomprehensible wickedness to taking the words of Jesus and using them to defend an abortion on demand position. See, here's the thing. If he would go back one verse from what he read, that verse that says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," is the second part of a statement. Jesus was asked about the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is in the verse before it where he said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your mind, with all your soul and with all your strength." The second great commandment is like it. "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Here's the thing. He's using the words of Jesus to promote abortion when he's ignoring that the basis of loving your neighbor as yourself is that you have a love for God with every part of your being. What he's doing is he is promoting the slaughter of unborn children that God has created and placed in a womb, and he's compounding that horrible position with gross blasphemy, quoting the very words of Jesus from Mark chapter 12. Let me tell you something. You can't love your neighbor if you don't love God. And if you refuse the verse about loving God, what you've done is you've just taken the words of Jesus and used them to promote the worship of the ancient pagan god Molech, who demanded child sacrifice. It is hard to imagine a grosser blasphemy than that practiced by the governor of California. Psalm 50 has something to say to this governor. The psalmist writes these words from God, Psalm 50, beginning in verse 16. "But to the wicked, God says, 'What right do you have to tell of my statutes and to take my covenant in your mouth? For you yourself hate discipline, and you throw my words behind you. When you see a thief, you become friends with him, and you associate with adulterers. You let your mouth loose in evil, and your tongue harnesses deceit. You sit and speak against your brother. You slander your own mother's son. These things you have done, and I kept silent. You thought that I was like you.'" You see, that's the problem with the left. They've created a false Jesus, a phony God that smiles on every blasphemous and evil position that they hold. Let's talk about the women who have abortions. One study found that at least 44%, almost 1 out of every 2 women who have an abortion later regret getting an abortion. At the same time, a Gallup poll found that only 7% of parents ever seriously regret having children. Did you know that there is even a pro-choice, post-abortion support organization for women that are struggling mentally and emotionally with their decision to abort? They won't tell you about it. They won't advertise it anywhere, but it exists. If this is just a clump of cells, if it's no different than just removing a tumor, why would even progressives recognize that some women really struggle with this and need help because they've been traumatized? As unhinged as activists and candidates are on this subject, the church will continue to do what the church has always done. We will advocate for the lives of unborn children, and we will sit quietly helping the women who suffer from the trauma of their abortion, helping the children who need new families. We will do what the church has always done. We will support life. This is Truth Currents.